want to start off by introducing to you our esteemed panel today for this first panel on our Smart City and Smart Consumer track here at the CTIA Supermobility Show. In order of their seats here, let me first introduce Tamara Casey. Tamara is the Chief Technology Officer from Ligado Networks. She brought a fan club. And we also have Asha Keddy. Asha is the Vice President in the Client and Internet of Things business at Intel. Then we have Vijay Raghavan. Vijay is the Head of Service Provider, Internet of Everything Market Development for Cisco. And then last but not least, Adolfo Massini. Adolfo is the head of global IoT connectivity with Nokia. Well, welcome to our panel, and thanks everybody for joining us here today. Just want to sort of frame out things a little bit for this conversation because we're going to be covering a lot of ground. As you could see from the title of this panel, we're talking about delivering IoT in big cities and small towns. That in and of itself could probably be an entire conference. So we're not going to get into all of the facets of it today, but we are going to talk about some pieces. So first of all, I just want to break it down a little bit, what this topic is all about. So first off, we are all being here at the Supermobility Show. We're all very familiar with the notion of IoT, right? Everything connected, as it says here. But what we're going to talk about today is explore the role of mobile in IoT and also what that looks like. IoT, of course, goes far beyond mobile, and we're talking about a lot of different things, and we'll touch a little bit here on what's the role of mobile when it comes to IoT and what other connectivity technologies should we also be thinking about. The second thing is this whole notion of smart cities really is, if you think about it, about use cases, different applications and services that we want to enable. And there's such a diversity of those use cases that we're going to explore a little bit about just what are the things that people are seeing as the greatest opportunities, the highest priority, because you have use cases ranging from real-time video streaming all the way to simple monitoring where you might only send a few bytes of data a day. Very, very different network requirements, very different business models. And clearly this is not a one-size-fits-all exercise. And we've got a lot of different perspectives here on the panel today that we're going to talk about. But the interesting thing to me is when you think about cities, right, we all have our own view of what cities are. And statistics, we do a lot of research on sort of the urbanization movement within PwC. And if you look at it, there's an estimate that says 70% of the world's population is going to actually live in cities by the year 2050. That's a massive shift from over time when we were really a agricultural, agrarian type society. So with that change, what is a city really becomes important. Right? It's not just New York City or San Francisco or Las Vegas that we're talking about. It may well be smaller cities, smaller towns that have, in many cases, very different use cases. Right? You may need to track an ambulance in one town. You may need to track an air ambulance in another small town. That's a different way of connectivity. So we're going to think about that, and we're also going to talk a little bit about why cities are interested in this. What is their motivation, right? What's the business case? Is it economic growth? Is it quality of life? Is it public safety? Is it disaster recovery, right? It's probably some combination. So we'll get into a lot of that. We'll dive deeper into a lot of these dimensions, and we've got a great panel here with, I don't even want to show their age of how many decades of collected experience there is between them, but really looking forward to this conversation. So I guess let me start off by asking the panel, to just comment on why did they actually think, why are they here? Why is this topic important to them and to your companies as well? So I guess, Tamara, let's start with you. Why does Ligado care, and what's your interest in this whole notion of IoT and smart cities?
Sure, thanks, Dan. Ligado cares about IoT and smart cities for a variety of reasons. We are first and foremost a mobile satellite system operator today, And we currently serve a number of verticals in the critical infrastructure, transportation, public safety, and energy segments. And as we look to expand our product offerings into those segments with terrestrial augmentation services, we're really starting from the nucleus that we already have and looking at how do we bring more robust connectivity, diverse types of connectivity, highly secure, highly reliable connectivity, but also that's highly mobile optimized. So the use cases that we focus on are really transportation, whether that's commercial transportation or rail type applications, aviation, those types of things. But for us, as you mentioned, it's not a one size fits all. Every geography is different. Every municipality, county, town, city has different types of requirements, and we're really focused on the mobility aspect of those requirements and how we can bring a unique and differentiated service offering to them.
Excellent, excellent. Thanks, Tamara. Asha, Intel maybe isn't a participant that a lot of people always think about in this space. What's Intel's interest in this, and what's your role with respect to that?
I think Intel's role is fundamental. If you think about cities, right, in a few more years, 60% of the world's population is in cities. And that puts a tremendous strain on resources, health, public services, transportation, and all of it. And the way we look at it is we're talking about a fully connected mobile intelligent society. And for this to happen, the IoT devices today, they can connect. Tomorrow, they will connect within a network. It's already happening. And then you need the compute and the intelligence in the network to have the information go. We are powering that through our connectivity, through our compute. We have network processing. We have software-defined networks. So at Intel, we are taking an extremely end-to-end view around it, all the way from devices to infrastructure. And we have a lot of businesses that are not only using the communications piece of it, but looking at IoT gateways, looking at transport like autonomous driving, drones, industrial automation, and all.
Excellent. Yeah, a lot of interesting use cases there, which I'm sure we'll circle back to. Vijay, obviously Cisco has been in the connectivity game for a little while here. What's Cisco's view of this whole sort of smart cities and IoT movement?
So we see IoT fundamentally as probably the single biggest growth opportunity which is going to happen in networking over the next 10 years, right? We are estimating by 2020 there should be 50 billion IoT devices on the market. And by the very nature of the number of devices and the number of traffic they generate, we believe there's a whole set of use case and opportunity to capture all the way from the applications down to the security, down to the connectivity. There are various different categories of IoT applications, but smart cities is clearly one of the leading ones which we see we have to tackle there. Because I think as my colleagues on the panel articulated, when you talk about a smart city, it crosses all the aspects of what happens in the city, whether it's in transportation or utilities or consumers, and those combined require unique solutions. And so we have invested very heavily in smart cities and see it as one of the big opportunities going forward.
Excellent, thanks, Vijay. Adolfo, you're focused now on IoT connectivity for Nokia. What does Nokia see as its role in all of this?
Well, you heard Vijay talk about 50 billion devices, and those 50 billion devices that are going to be out there is going to imagine the amount of connectivity that is going to tax the network, right? And there are a significant amount of our customers out there with all these networks that need to be upgraded, that need to be enhanced in order to, be able to be able to handle all of that capacity, right? And enable these use cases and applications. So we're, equally as interested in enabling all those use cases that Tamara's talking about. We're looking at public safety, we're looking at, utilities and smart cities and healthcare, right? But then there's also going to be new networks coming about, right? So we have to be able to then interoperate across the different technologies and help our customers do that to enable these use cases.
Yeah, there's a few themes that I think we're going to explore here that you brought out, Adolfo. Thank you. I want to start actually with maybe what's the elephant in the room. And this is the question I really wrestle with when I think about smart cities, and that is, who exactly is the customer? Is it a city? Is it government? Is it commercial? Is it lots of customers? Vijay, you're focused on market development. I'm curious if maybe you can start with your thoughts and then we can expand on that.
Absolutely. No, that's a very interesting question, right? And how we have observed the market as such, it depends on who the city is, how they're structured, and the economics depend on a large dynamic of how large the city is, right? When you start looking at very large cities, right, let's say the top 20 metros in the world, they tend to have very different departments and different organizations who can self-sustain a lot of the different investments themselves. May not be optimally so, but none of us say governments are the most optimal, but at least they're able to afford it. And the customer structures are very differently in that way. You have departments which are different smart cities. Once you start going down to smaller cities, we look at it as much more of not just the city and its departments and the government. It also has to incorporate the different industries in the city, whether it's the retailers, whether it's the healthcare industries, as Adolfo pointed out, and has to become a much more integrated approach and has to become a much more service-oriented approach. That's what we observed. So.
Yeah. Other comments, other perspectives on who the customer is?
I think everybody, from me as a homeowner to the utilities that I have, to private companies, small companies, as they look at automating the the lights and optimizations around that, to autonomous driving, and public sector and health.
And I think one of the observations we've had is there's an overlap or convergence between the use cases and the customers, especially when you think about things like energies and utilities and public transportation types of systems. A lot of, as Vijay pointed out, a lot of these things in a city may be sort of run by different departments, but those departments need to share information, they need to collaborate. So we're seeing an emergence of what we call these convergence of these use cases. So for example, if you have a gas leak, the first reaction is you want to turn off the power, the electricity to where that gas leak is occurring. We've had conversations with government regulators about transportation use cases where examples like criticality of managing railroad crossing infrastructure is very important, because not every railroad crossing is well marked and has lots of lights and signs and bells and whistles. And so, it's a huge issue for the Federal Railway Administration, who's interested in not just precision train control in order to manage the locomotive as it approaches a crossing, but also what are the capabilities that could be incorporated into a commercial transportation vehicle or a driverless assist or automated vehicle that would also help bring awareness to that safety situation and be able to manage both interactions at an intersection like that. So we're seeing a lot more of this overlap and convergence. Drones is another great example where we see a pent-up demand in all of these verticals to incorporate drone usage, ideally beyond line of sight drone usage, into their day-to-day operations to improve safety or reduce costs. So this convergence of these use cases is critical, and it leads to exactly the convergence of customer dynamic that Asha and Vijay were speaking about.
Over time, I think as we continue and evolve and we learn, I think the business models change over time, right? And then, that's going to bring in new entrances, new customers, right, that we'll have to, enable these services for.
Absolutely.
So you've mentioned a bunch of really interesting, use cases here. I'm curious, all of you are out there in the market looking at this and talking with potential adopters. What are some of the more interesting use cases that you're seeing? Because Asha, you're focusing on standards and such, you must think about this a lot. What are you seeing from Intel's perspective?
From an Intel's perspective, we have already started a lot of work, including with GE or with other companies in lighting. And how do you infer, for example, we look at things on 3 technology tracks. One is mission critical, where you look at high bandwidth, low latency. That's where things like disaster relief, autonomous driving, and all come in. So that's one perspective. Another perspective is the massive machine communications, where we talked about like lighting, health, carbon monoxide poisoning, things like that. And mass amounts of information flows. And the third angle is the evolution, like augmented reality and things like that. But they make our lives much more, like if you're in a car and you don't have anything to do, I mean, there's only so much Pokemon Go you can play. So we actually push all these 3 things. But I think the theme that my fellow panelists have said actually is what will come out next, which is the theme of convergence. When a kid no longer has to learn to drive a car, and the car is actually communicating with the city lights, and then that forms a different network that can help law enforcement, crime detection, safety, and other things. So I think the real theme as we expand is one of convergence.
Yeah. You know, and then the other, I mean, as we all know, is with the applications continue to evolve, right? And then, you know, the younger generation, I mean, think about the amount of video that's going to be consumed, you know, in 5 more years, right? And then the kind of use cases that come from that, you know, video analytics, you know, for crowd control or traffic management. I mean, there's, you know, a lot of different other use cases that will come about based on, you know, the increased use of video.
Yes, so what we say, definitely, as Asha and Adolf was saying, is a lot of the primary development, the use cases we're seeing is around the lighting, around the safety and the car, automobile spaces. And that's where we're seeing a lot of the cities adopting. But from an interest perspective, what actually has most fascinated me is what we call, so we're starting to see few cities roll out what we call citizen engagement platforms, right? So this is where they're trying to offer how much data they can expose to citizens to develop their own, and different companies, private companies, to develop their own apps. And I had the example of Pokemon, right? So there's way on how do you create different, more use cases. And my belief is there's going to be some real killer apps that are going to come out of that. And the key aspect of this is how can you create open systems so that you're able to generate the creativity to do those things. And I think that's going to be something we all have to keep an eye on.
Yeah, the data interactions here are really important, and I think, you know, it goes back to this question of who's the customer, right?
Yeah.
In some ways, that also bleeds right into who owns the data. So I guess in terms of adoption, you know, I'll say we've seen personally a very interesting sort of pattern for smart cities adoption, and in fact, I would say that here in the U.S. we're perhaps a little bit behind in some cases. It fascinates me, you know, within our PwC team, one of our biggest smart cities projects right now is actually in Kazakhstan, where the government has really embraced the use of smart cities to advance things. But, you know, I want to use that as just an example point. You know, what are the challenges facing adoption? You know, what can we do to make it go quicker, and what needs to happen? So, you know, Adolfo, maybe I'll start with you, you know, your perspective on that, and, you know, what are you seeing in terms of what will drive people to become smart cities?
Right. You talk about challenges in you know, Internet of Things, and the challenge. I mean, it's you know, IoT in general challenge, right? Whether it's small city or large city, right? So you know, what are the common things between small cities and big cities from a standpoint of challenges? You know, right now we're going through, you know, there's a lot of standards out there, right? The access technology, right? Whether it's unlicensed, the spectrum availability, licensed or unlicensed. You know, the ability, you know, to use, you know, how to use the data and access to different types of sources of data, and then be able to act on it in a useful way, and then be able to monetize that, right? So the business model is a challenge for both small and large, right? What's common is obviously everybody, you know, all city wants to drive growth. They want to ensure public safety, right? And they want to ensure sustainability, right? So maybe some of the differences, and you know, maybe my colleagues here can expand on that. Some of the differences and the challenges is the coverage, right? In urban area versus, a rural area, right? So, I mean, what's going on right now relative to all the different cities, the large cities in the world, there's an effort to densify, right? To provide really good indoor coverage, right? To be able to provide all of these types of use cases. They're big effort in densifying, the urban areas. So, will the rural areas take kind of a backseat to that, right? So there's a prioritization. The types of use cases are different, right? So while maybe in an urban area, they're looking at traffic management, right? In a smaller town, you don't really need to look at traffic management. You might or may not, but maybe there'll be other emergency disaster recovery type applications that are more important there, right? The local economy, right? So, can they sustain, what is the business model? In the rural areas, will they need to look at consortiums, right? To provide, some other service providers to be able to pool resources and provide that kind of service to be able to enable those use cases. So those are some of the challenges that I think are different between small cities and large.
And I think I'll just add to Adolfo's points. From a standards point of view, I think we have to stop talking about bits per second, per meter square, per hertz and all, and start translating this into something that the different utilities can evolve. There's the security angle too, like we start talking about metadata versus, you don't want all the data, so there's the security and the privacy angle that needs to be addressed. And I just wanted to add those 2 points.
Yeah. And if I could add to what Adolfo and Asha said, I think that, there's a fundamental requirement, regardless of the size of the city or the town that you're trying to solve. And that fundamental requirement, Adolfo touched on it, is coverage. And for us, our focus, given that we have pervasive North American coverage through our satellite system, is to look at how we can support as much of those capabilities as we can with that system and then augment terrestrially on an as-needed basis in order to deliver almost a custom type of solution. Because to the point Adolfo made, the varying degrees of sophistication in these communities, it runs the gamut. It's extreme. And all the spectrum mumbo-jumbo, all the standards mumbo-jumbo, a chief of police in a small city or a small town, has no ability to try to synthesize all that and design their requirements. So I think this notion of convergence, of coverage, demystifying the technology, and making sure that whatever the coverage augmentation is, whether it's pervasive macro coverage, custom-built type solutions, densification in the more urban areas, as Adolfo mentioned, all of that has to be considered. But as telecommunications professionals, we have a responsibility to make sure that we demystify the technology and the spectrum situation and bring solutions to these communities, large or small.
I think just to add to Tamara, I think it's a, IoT in general, I mean, it's about the end-to-end, right, the entire solution, right? And it involves, applications, as Vijay talked about, devices, modules, all, the sensors, connectivity layer, everything, right? Security. And by the way, there's an enormous amount of partners, and the ecosystem is just enormous out there. And so, like Tamara said, being able as telecommunication providers to be able to pull that together and help figure out how do we enable that particular use case within that rural area versus an urban area, right? So.
Yeah, I mean, to add to what Adolfo was saying, I think it all is boiling down to economics from what the use case we're seeing out there. Fundamentally, for an adoption of smart cities, you need scale of economics. And for scale of economics, you need a kind of managed service cloud approach to take and drive it. That comes back to major capital investments upfront. Who's going to stand up and take and drive this? And capital investments happen clearly in some of the oil-rich economies. It's happening from from a perspective because the government puts out money there. Otherwise, I really feel is the capital investments would need to come from service providers, or by service providers, I don't necessarily talk about telcos alone, but somebody has to stand up and willing to stand up these services and be willing to take out a 5 to 10 year kind of monetization model to take and drive this. We start to see that happen, but the pace, I think, needs to accelerate over the next 5 years.
Yeah, you raise a good point, and there is we're also attuned and accustomed to being in a capital-intensive industry, right? That we often forget that can be a big hurdle to the adoption of these technologies. And to that end, Tamara, I want to ask you. I mean, as the CTO here in the room, right? What's your point of view? You talked about a lot of different network technologies, right? You talked and issues, right? Densification, enabling the cloud, right? Having sort of ubiquity of coverage and connectivity. What do you see as what do we need to be thinking about in terms of networks and the interoperability issues that I think are really at the core of what you talked about?
Yeah, interoperability is certainly a critical component of it, but I think also moving from an operator or technology vendor type of mentality into a systems integrator or solution provider mentality is critically important. We partner very, very closely with our customers on the development of specific technology to meet their requirements. We look to industry and how we can embrace standards-based technology to augment that, whether it's traditional terrestrial wireless technologies, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, et cetera. And frankly, there are cases where less traditional technologies or even proprietary technologies play a critical role as well, things like in the public safety segment. Just because they're proprietary doesn't preclude them from being interoperated with, and that is a critical focus for us. So our role at Ligado, and my role specifically, is to focus on the convergence of those technology solutions, whether standards-based, proprietary-based, or things that are custom developed and to meet the needs of the verticals that we serve. We work very, very closely with our customers and our vendor partners to make sure we are optimizing all of those components, but at the end of the day, as I said, demystifying that for the end user customer. We have one example that maybe will help bring it home very clearly. We work with a very large helicopter completion company, and who are primarily in the business of helicopter completions as well as air ambulance and law enforcement helicopter services. And they have a very unique set of requirements. A good portion of those requirements can be met with our satellite technology today, but as we look at terrestrial augmentation in something like an air ambulance use case, serving those sort of secondary or tertiary types of markets, Shreveport, Louisiana, Montgomery, Alabama, these kinds of places, their healthcare needs are just as critical, their law enforcement needs are just as critical, and looking at how you take solutions that the aviation partner has developed specifically for that vertical, our satellite types of capabilities, terrestrial augmentation capabilities, incorporation of Wi-Fi and Bluetooth for further enablement and further range, 5G technologies that are emerging. They have a need that meets all of that. Most folks don't realize in an air ambulance case, more than 50% of their business in many cases is just transportation between two hospitals. It's very easy to think about how you design a sort of custom type network solution for that use case. And in that particular case, you're running the gamut of proprietary technologies they've developed themselves, satellite technologies, and then terrestrial augmentation technologies.
Yeah, just to add to Tamara, I mean, I think from an interoperability standpoint, I think, and I don't want to speak for my colleagues here, but I would think that we have a general agreement that there's going to be multiple access technologies, right? In the IoT space, because of the different types of use cases, because of the different priorities, worldwide, depending on where you're at, and the priorities of, of that particular city. There'll be different, multiple access technologies and multiple ways to be able to enable that use case, right? So, we have to make sure that our networks are able to interoperate with each other.
It's this network of networks concept, right? And which is getting talked about more and more now in the context of 5G evolution. But whether it's legacy terrestrial technologies, emerging 5G technologies, other new standards, proprietary technologies. At the end of the day, you cannot support these IoT use cases without that sort of network of networks approach.
Yeah, the scale is very important, essentially, how we scale these solutions, because some of the solutions are so simple they can be done in high schools.
Yeah.
But the challenge is in scaling, and hence, at least at Intel, we have as much emphasis on the network pieces of it as we have on the client.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely good. It's, I've seen a lot of cases where, as we started looking at these smart city deals, there's a lot of fixation between different vendors on the network. I mean, obviously, if you are SP, you're saying, hey, we want to do a mobile network. If you are going as an integrator, you're looking at a Wi-Fi network, et cetera. And frankly, we find the customer getting confused here, right? Because they feel they have to pick, and when they pick one of these, they find the economics don't necessarily work across everything. So I think it's, I think we should take the burden as the experts in terms of this to really coach the customers on how they can navigate. It's not one investment you're making which you have to live with for the next 50 years.
Well,
There's options.
And Asha brought up a good point earlier as well that doesn't get talked about enough, I think, in the context of IoT. The reliability, whether it's of basic coverage or the service or the connectivity, the security of these applications, privacy issues that were mentioned. As you start to move more and more into these spaces, the traditional dynamics in telecom of the levels of reliability and service don't necessarily hold up any longer. And so looking at this from the ultra reliable aspects, in some cases lower latency, higher security requirements, diversity of connections being available for primary and redundancy, these types of things become overarching themes that need to be respected and considered as you're looking to deliver a comprehensive end-to-end solution for these types of use cases and verticals.
Yeah, and Tamara, you raise an important point, and I want to pick that up and maybe ask Asha, her thoughts on this. Which is, Asha, earlier you mentioned the use case or the set of use cases around critical infrastructure and IoT, and I think Tamara is spot on, right? That in a normal telecom setting, we're not necessarily used to or even good at, supporting critical infrastructure, right? And that sort of, fail-proof, right, type of solution. So what do you think about, when you think about IoT in terms of deploying it for critical infrastructure and even for transportation, right, where there's a public safety element to this, how do you look at that when you think about smart city adoption, and what has to be different?
I think I'll start a little bit by talking about my specific role. I do 3 things at Intel. One is next generation of technology. So we spend a lot of energy on prototypes and trials and use cases. We use that, and then we focus on standards. And also I'm focusing now on the early business cases. So I think these 3 things together happened because we found that when we look, let's take transport, okay? There are different aspects of an autonomous connected car. There's the mission critical aspects of how to stop, but there's also the entertainment aspects of like what do you do when you don't have to drive. There's the public safety aspects of the vehicles talking and doing the look ahead, or even talking to the traffic lights so that the other traffic lights in the city know what's going on, right? And including if there's a crime or other special things. All of these take our imagination and convergence to a level we're not used to. So the way that I think is very important is to combine technology with trials. So we're working with service providers, operators, and all. A car is not a big phone. You have to actually separate the RF and the modem. So there's a lot of technical challenges. There's shock absorption and all. So I think we have to do a lot of trials, evolution, practice, and when we can luckily put like our RFICs and light sensors and all of it. So I think it's a combination of business, technology trials, and vendors.
Other comments? What are you seeing around critical infrastructure and their ability to engage with IoT and smart cities at this point?
Well, I mean, just to piggyback on the, the automotive case, I mean, obviously latency is a huge issue, right? So how do you, take out latency out of your network? And without getting into a lot of the technical stuff, but, so there'll be a certain way to do that, right? Whether it's, using licensed technology and, and be able to, you push the computing out to the edges of the network, right? So that you can get that, reduce that latency as low as possible, right? To be able to, the reaction time when you step on the brake, right, and be able to have the car stop is low enough to be able to do that. So versus other types of technologies that won't require that kind of latency. So it's about the use cases, and it's about working with these with the operators and the customers to be able to enhance the network and deliver the right components within the network to drive that use case.
I think another aspect of it is understanding that each of the critical infrastructure players, whether in transportation or utility type infrastructure or something, they've been on an independent journey of their own. The railroads have been in the process of implementing precision train control. Commercial trucking companies have been adopting much richer telematics solutions over the years. Utilities have been early adopters of IoT technology, whether it's, oil and gas or electricity or what have you, water. So they've been on this journey of their own. And so we tend to talk about sort of the telecom types of standards that we need to focus on converging, but we cannot forget in critical infrastructure that they've been on their own journey. They have their own technologies. All of those things have to be incorporated and supported and harmonized, if you will, when you're thinking about the totality of the solution. And for the critical infrastructure folks, their expectations around reliability, responsiveness, redundancy, security, it's very different than, frankly, what we care about as consumers using our smartphones or tablets. And so, we have to not just, harmonize sort of the traditional telecom types of technologies or wireless types of technologies. We have to look at the technologies that have grown up organically inside of all of these verticals as well, and then look at how we stitch this together with this, in our parlance, this blanket of ultra-reliable and ultra-secure connectivity. And frankly, in many cases, that means redundant forms of connectivity. Which, to your point about capital expenditures, this is, if you want that level of reliability, it's expensive. And having service providers willing to recognize that, put the time into developing the business cases that can sustain this, that maybe aren't 3-year paybacks, but are 5-year or 7-year paybacks. Having the opportunity to bring that much more holistic solution is important. And the benefit for the service provider out of that experience at the end of the day is a much more loyal customer, a much stickier customer, lower churn customer. It's, when you develop these types of solutions for these verticals, candidly, they're not going to be prone to, bopping to the latest, low-cost promo that's going on. They're really looking for a system integrator to deliver this holistic thing, and it changes the dynamics of the business model and allows us to pursue not just that integration, but then supporting them with the application layers on top of that, the network processing, data management services, all of those things those are not their core competencies. That's not where they focus. And many of the CIOs in the critical infrastructure industries are struggling with those issues.
So Tamara, you just used the word, solution a couple of times in there, and the need to really bring this integrated capability and do that integration in many cases for these customers of smart cities. I'm curious for the panel's view. We talk a lot, and I think our industry is really good about serving the needs of big cities, big companies. What do you think we're going to have to do to implement IoT in smaller cities and towns? What do we need? I'm sure there's a lot of people here in the audience who from organizations that do systems integration, that do implementation. What's it going to take to really support smaller cities and towns? Vijay, I'll ask you, maybe to start us off.
Yeah, no, as I was saying, it's my strong belief that they have to go, smaller cities will have to go, need to look at a managed service cloud model in terms of driving. So somebody who can bring scale across managing multiple cities and providing that scale of the infrastructure to take and manage from them. And we are starting to see that already develop. The key question remains, is that service provider going to be a connectivity provider, traditional telco, or are they going to be on the top of players who take and drive those? So definitely for small, but even mid-sized, any city which is less than 1 million people, we are starting to see managed services model being predominantly taken to drive the marketplace.
Fantastic. Before we go to ask some questions from the audience, I've got one final question. After this, we'll ask Jay to help us take some questions. But given today's discussion, and this is maybe lead into some of the additional panels on this track later today. Given today's discussion, I'm really curious, and this may be the burning question perhaps, but are we going to have to wait for 5G to get all this? That I think is the looming question out there. Curious for your thoughts. Tamara, maybe we'll start with you.
Well, we may have a slightly different perspective on this, but our perspective is absolutely not. We see these industries with real needs. The needs are now. They've been waiting. They've been struggling, as I mentioned, in many cases to implement their own technology solutions, try to find their own spectrum, build networks. And with technologies that are emerging today, that exist today, either in their own domains or in the traditional telecom domains, solutions can be brought to bear now. 5G, from our perspective, is merely an enabler of future functionality and even greater things to come. But these solutions can be supported today. We work very closely with Intel, with Asha's team, on a recently adopted 3GPP standard called FEMTC, which is for us a very critical and very interesting technology that can be brought to bear very, very quickly, that really takes the best of a lot of the learnings of IoT developments, whether it was narrowband enhancements or massive machine types of enhancements, but also Category M and Category 1 work, and how you blend these existing technologies, how in our case we blend satellite technologies and capabilities, as well as the proprietary systems that many of these verticals have already adopted. It's this network of network approach. 5G is just another network that obviously is coming fast, and we have to be very mindful of that and try and do things in a way that facilitate that integration and make that a smooth and seamless transition to offering even greater capabilities, lower cost structures, et cetera. But there's no need to wait today. We have the technology solutions today as an industry to meet these needs. What's frankly missing from our perspective is a lack of partnerships, a lack of collaborative efforts amongst the types of folks who are sitting up here today, and that's changing. We're all changing that model and changing the way we engage, whether it's with our suppliers, application developers, the customer, et cetera. That is the critical piece, and as Vijay mentioned, how you bring scale to these more challenging, smaller constituencies, but who have perhaps the most demanding and critical needs of all.
Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I have a slightly mixed perspective. I think what's accelerating 5G, as Tamara said, is the need is today. And so we're developing solutions today. But I think where 5G comes into picture is when you have to scale it with the additional spectrum, when you have high bandwidth for mission critical. So the way I look at it is the demand is today, the solutions are today, but 5G with the additional spectrum and additional optimizations and air interface slicing will have economies of scale that will make it ubiquitous.
Yeah, I'm absolutely with Tamara. The choke points we are seeing in the market right now have nothing to do with the requirements of much failure connectivity. It's much more on issues like security and economics. So we think the opportunity is there. But again, when when things will scale, everything has to start, right? When scale
Yeah.
happens, absolutely 5G will have a critical role there. So,
Yeah, I think the key word is, do we have to wait? And I think we all agree, no,
Yeah.
you don't, we don't
Yeah.
have to wait, right? I mean, you look at cities, around the world, they're not waiting, right? So they're using, existing technologies, they're enhancing LTE, right? The 3G, PP, technologies, that are coming out, narrowband IoT, LTM.
Proprietary.
I mean, all these things that will give us, the ability to enable these use cases now. I mean, it's happening right now, right? So 5G, absolutely. That will then be an enhancement in scale based on what we currently do. So we don't have to wait.
Terrific. Yeah, thank you for the great perspectives. We've got a few minutes to take a couple of questions. We got one here, maybe in the front, Jay, and start, and then one back there.
We got about 5 minutes, and then we have to move on for our next one. So,
I just have a question about engineer deployment. What is the economic way, practical way to deploy a few million or tens of millions of these low power devices in a very quick and economical way?
Yeah, to me, it's a question of the use case, right? The question of the use case where you are seeing the deployment of these devices. So if you're looking at low power devices, it becomes, obviously there are some key market use cases which are most prominent in the market. As Dasha was pointing out, lighting is one of the key of them. There is fleet deployments in different directions. So I don't know if that answers your question, but you have to pick the use case where these low power devices are going to get the most value.
And to add to Vijay, at Intel, we like to say that since the days of the single-use sensors are over, which means the most practical way is the light bulb will do more than what a light bulb does today. It has sensors, fixtures, and all. The washing machine, right? My washing machine has Wi-Fi and all sorts of things already. So all these things that we use in our daily lives will have multiple functions, and that's the most practical way we see.
okay, we have time for one more.
I think all these technologies are great, but any organization, they have to look at their digital transportation, which is the change in the organization, change inside of their organization. For example, transportations. How many times we stuck behind the lights, which in a road, they are not green or red, then what's going to happen to the car? All of them, they're going to stop. I mean, the organization has to be changed. Every organization has to change the way they do business. And the other thing is that the second one is the security is very important. All these technology, telecom is being around for 40, 50 years before mobile got diversified. And we done, work with the NASA, when today we're going to the moon, communication been working for 40 years. But the only thing we got to look at it, organization change, how to behave, how we running our business, plus the security is very important. Because I don't want to be in the middle of the night, my shower will turn on. Anyway, thank you.
Thanks. And
Yeah. I think we would all agree, that there's a great deal of transformation required in all of these industries, right, to enable these use cases, right? The fundamental, whether it's the government, the industry, public safety, whatever it may be, right, needs to transform. A lot of considerations here, and I think, maybe the panel wants to comment on the security aspect of it as well. But that's certainly one major consideration, especially given the use cases.
Look, it's table stakes, right? Security is table stakes. Yeah, but you have to have it. And it's not just about the network security, it's also the device security, right? Yeah. So you got to be able to, from an end-to-end standpoint, make sure that the entire network and the devices are secure. And, so that's, the industry is evolving, and we're putting in those type of technologies to do that.
And safety, right? Like the vehicle-to-vehicle communication means that platooning can happen, right? And let's just take cars for a few more seconds. The manufacturers' approaches to cars are fundamentally different. For example, traditional ones look at cars that have electronics. There are some other famous ones that treat the car as an electronic. There are still others that do these automated ride sharing and are trying to change the systems now. And there's a fourth vector of manufacturers that are developing it as an entertainment vehicle. All of these things actually force a level of discussion much ahead of when they're actually going to be deployed.
Tamara, Asha, Vijay, Adolfo, thank you very much. Great insights today. I want to ask the audience a quick round of applause for our panelists. And thanks to you all for joining as well.